Good morning. Thanks everybody for coming along. I hope everybody's not got too sore ahead after TechFest. That's my obligatory mention of TechFest last night, of course. So welcome to a whirlwind tour of .NET Framework version 4. I'm Owen Evans and I'm Senior Developer at Xero. Okay, so just a quick warning about today's talk. I'm not going to go into anything in depth. I've come up from Wellington. Of course, we like wins in Wellington, and wins will take you through things nice and fast. So this is a whirlwind tour of lots of things that are new in .NET 4. So I won't be going into anything in depth. It's a bit like the food at TechFest last night. None of it's going to be quite high quality, but there will be a lot of it. Okay, so just a quick look back on the history of .NET. So who was around back in 2002 and developing on .NET 1 when we first released it, when Microsoft first released it? Good, a few of you. And who was around when we actually started really developing with .NET and 1.1 came out? Okay, cool. So we had .NET 1, .NET 1.1, and then we had this stack of .NETs all built on the same CLR. So we had CLR version 2, and then on top of that, we put .NET 3 and .NET 3.5. We didn't release a new CLR, we just had the one CLR to work with. And then this year, obviously, .NET 4 got released with its brand new CLR. So with .NET 4, you're working on a brand new CLR. It's not working on the 2.0 CLR. So that's just something to keep in mind. But we'll go through kind of the pros and cons of that later on. In terms of what's in the .NET framework, it's quite a fully featured stack now. We've got quite a lot of things, such as Link, such as WCF, lots of things for developing client-side and rich web applications, such as Silverlight, etc. In terms of the tooling that we've got available for you, on the website, obviously we've got Web Forms, which has come up to version 4. Ajax, which remarkably enough is also on version 4. MVC, which is strangely enough only on version 2, even though they've kind of called everything else version 4. We've got client applications, so if you're working in WPF, you've got WPF version 4, and MEF, if anybody knows what that is. If not, we'll go into that in a sec. On the client-server communications side, we've obviously got WCF, Windows Communication Foundation. In terms of core framework features available to you, we've obviously got the task parallel library and parallel link, which if anybody missed Ivan's talk yesterday, if you want to know more about parallel link and parallel library, then I would suggest you download the video for that and have a look. In terms of the runtime level, we've got the integration with the dynamic language runtime instead of just the CLR. We've got the DLR. We've got type equivalence, which I'll go into what that means at the end of this presentation. And we've got in-process side-by-side running. So we can actually run the .NET 2 CLR and the .NET 4 CLR in the same process. So we get around some of that problematic kind of changing of the CLR. We've also got, for data access, we've got Data Services 1.5 and Entity Framework version 4. Okay, so let's dive into some of those features and some of the new things that have come out with .NET version 4. With Web Forms, how many people here are Web Forms developers? Okay, how many people have had problems with their client IDs becoming quite messy? Okay, cool. Microsoft has started allowing control over those client IDs a bit more in depth. We have got the routing module that's been brought in from MVC, and yes, I do pronounce it routing and not routing. Okay, so you can giggle away, that's fine. There's also various control enhancements and a new charting control, and also support for dynamic data that's got rolled into the .NET 4 framework. In terms of MVC, there's MVC version 2 comes out with areas and view helpers, as well as lots of other little features and tweaks. And the Ajax library is now allowing for client templating, and also jQuery is now bundled in with all your projects. Okay? So now it's demo time. So this presentation will go into quite a few little demos, nothing too in-depth, but it will show you some code. So hopefully it all comes up. Awesome. So here I have a Web Forms project, just your classic Web Forms project. I haven't done anything amazing to it. All I've got is a little enumerable of awesome things. Of course, they're just a classic bag of awesome things, and they just have an ID and a name. And then I've got my page, which is just my default AX. And then you'll notice there's a new thing. That's the one I want. Client ID mode. And we've set the client ID mode predictable. And that's a new thing in Web Forms version 4, essentially suggesting that previously it was pretty chaotic, which is kind of true. But what I'm saying here is I want to be able to predict what my IDs are going to come out as, and I'll use a suffix of the ID property of the elements that I'm using. So if I now run this up, one sec. If I run this up, I can now look at my source, view source, that one there. And if I look at my elements now, they've got very much a kind of predictable ID to them, rather than the kind of MacGuffins that we'd have before, where if you put something inside something else, then you end up with a terribly long client ID. Okay? Not a great kind of in-depth demo, but just to show you some things that are there. We've also got other options, such as static, which means I completely want to take control of this, and also auto ID, which is kind of the default from before. Okay, so that's as brief as I want to touch on client IDs. The routing framework is brought in from MVC, so it's now no longer part of MVC, it's now part of the core framework and available for anybody to use. So if anybody's come over from MVC or uses MVC, then you know what this is all about. But for those of you who don't, I might have a page in some random folder somewhere, and I don't particularly want to expose that kind of decision that I've made as a developer onto my clients or my users. I'd rather hide this behind a much more usable URL. So instead, I can use the routing framework to say that this product's page actually maps to a resource that's available on a particular URL. So here I can say that products, and then I'm going to pull out some templating and say that whatever comes after products is actually a variable called category. And I can look in my products ASPX, and down the bottom here, I can say that I want to take out that root parameter of category, and then I want to use it within my query up above. So I can say that if the product name is the product that I passed in. Sorry, if the product category is the product that I pass in. So if I run that up very quickly, debug, start new instance. There we go, that's the one I want. Okay, so that'll just run up and give me a list of categories, and here's one I've been to before. And you can see it's actually pulled out the category based on the URL. And I can zoom in so you can see that, okay, just to show off some tools. So you can see there that there's that pulling in from things that we've got in ASP.NET MVC. What else have we got new in .NET 4 for web forms and for other things? So Ajax. So how many people use the Microsoft Ajax libraries? Okay. So client-side templating allows me to say, if I get data off my server, this is how it should be displayed on the website. This is the template, essentially, for displaying that data. So I just got a classic web project here. There's nothing ASP.NET specific about it. That's just to demonstrate that you don't have to be in an ASP.NET MVC or Web Forms project to use this. This is just the Ajax library itself. And if I go into the default here, you'll notice I've got, if I can find what I'm looking for, notice I've got this sys class declaration up here. Let me just zoom in. Oh, wow, that's really big. There you go. And this allows me to kind of just declare a template within my HTML and actually get Ajax to then bind that to data that's coming back over the wire. So this is just a templating language that's for Ajax version 4. Nice and easy to kind of understand a little bit of what's going on. I'm binding it to title here, and I'm binding it to first name, and some of them are given default values. And what's going on is if I look in the JavaScript here, this is all the JavaScript that's needed to wire that up. I'm just going to keep doing that so that you kind of, it's JavaScript. I find JavaScript really kind of complex to say that this is an easy piece of JavaScript as opposed to this is a complex piece of JavaScript. But actually it's not that complex. It's only 39 lines long, and that's with some double spacing. And that's basically taking my data from wire and saying, apply this template to it and display it on page. So if I run that up, what does that look like? And you're going to have to watch really closely as this runs up. I've got to obviously stop my previous debugging session. Debug, start new instance. Yay. So if you just keep watching, done. Okay, so that was just Ajax then saying, I've got data, I'm going to populate it. Okay, I can refresh that, and it will do exactly the same thing. Okay, so the page actually didn't have any of that data, and it also allows me to live update things. So I've given two templates, one for the table and one for the actual item itself. Okay, so that is a bit further than I actually meant to go, but that's controlling client IDs and routing, and also Ajax templating, which is what that demo is. So MVC has obviously got a few new features in version 2. So I'll switch back a sec, and I'll go into MVC. So how many people have used MVC? How many people use MVC on a regular basis? Okay, cool. How many people have heard of the NID dinner samples? Okay, so basically the core team behind MVC, they basically wanted a demonstration piece of code, and NID dinner is available free on Codeplex for anybody to go and download, and it's a good example of how to build an MVC project. And I'll just quickly get up one page that will show you some of the new features that are in MVC 2. I don't want to go into this too in depth. There was a talk yesterday on MVC version 2 and 3, new features. So if you want to know more in depth what's new, you can go to that talk online and download it. Oh, let's just ignore those errors. Lots of them. Wow. Okay, host a dinner. Excuse me one second. And it's gone. Okay. Anyway, so what I was going to show you, if the demo gods weren't kind of against me today, was in views. This is something you could only do in version 2. If I go to my dinner model, you can see that I've got these helpers now that allow me to quickly scaffold up editors for certain models. So I've got this helper that says editor for this object. That's all I wanted to show you, and that will pull up a certain text box based on dynamic data, and I can look at my model, and I can show you the dinner model has a metadata type of dinner validation, and that's how I decide what kind of text box or otherwise I'm actually going to show to the user. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool. All right, cracking on. So WPF. How many people here are web forms? Are Windows developers? Cool. How many people use WPF? Okay, good. A good percentage of you. Okay, new in WPF version 4. We've got a new data grid for you to use. So data grid control. There's also various Windows 7 enhancements and enhancements to allow you to take control of multi-touch. Probably would have heard quite a few things around Silverlight and also Windows Phone 7 that's coming out. And also there's a ribbon control. So if you want to emulate the kind of look and feel of Office, for example, you can take control with the ribbon. But kind of one of the more core features that is new for version 4 is meth. So how many people have heard of meth? Sorry to keep doing these votes. It's just kind of good to keep you kind of active. Keeps you alive. Okay, so MEF stands for the Managed Extensibility Framework. And to quote Microsoft, it's a library for creating lightweight, extensible applications. Okay, so basically it's a library that allows you to pull in DLLs that conform to a certain coding standard and just load them dynamically into your application. And it allows us to switch from this idea of statically compiling an application to actually dynamically composing an application of various kind of moving parts, essentially. And it conforms to the open-close principle, so that you're open for, you're closed for modification, but you're open for extensibility. And so if we look at what MEF actually means, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up another demo project here. All these demos are available online, and I'll come up with a link at the end of my slide, so you can go away and play with these at your own kind of risk. That's not really what I want to say, but you know what I mean. Okay, so this is called Contoso Automotive. And essentially, if you're a car salesman, this might make sense to you, but generally we're all developers in the room. But basically, it will pull in lists and display them in a certain way. So you can see here that I've got 5 types of cars, or 5 makes of cars, and it's loading some data up and showing them in kind of a informative way. Don't worry too much about what the UI is doing. Just know that it's loading stuff up and displaying it on the UI. If I look in kind of my common library here, if I look in the app, the way that I'm creating this app is I'm asking aggregate catalog to create a new aggregate catalog with my current assembly. Now, aggregate catalog is part of the MEF framework. Okay, so I'm creating a catalog out of the types that are within my assembly, within the directory of my assembly. And then I create a container with that catalog. So if anybody's come from a background of IOC or used IOC, MEF creates some kind of similar kind of constructs, this idea of a container, and then you ask the container for a certain type, which is the cache maker window. And I can look at the cache maker window, and it has this attribute called export. So that's another part of this MEF framework. It says, I export a property that I expect you to fill for me. And I can look at this car queries. All it says is import many of a certain type. And it's just an observable collection. It's nothing kind of fancy. But there's nowhere in my code where I actually set the value of this property. Okay? I never actually specifically say this collection is made up of these instances. Okay? I ask MEF to do that for me. Now, the power of that is that without recompiling, I have this other extension down here. So if I just quickly go to the directory, this one's built in VB. It's not part of the core compilation that I pulled in. And I can just pull those DLLs and copy them into the bin directory of the main automotive program. And then run up the automotive again. And you can see suddenly it's pulled in this new extension. And it's picked it up that it's there. So MEF allows you to actually extend your program without compiling in new parts. So it's a very quick way of getting this kind of plug-in development. This also makes use of the new grid control. So this is a new grid control down here to allow you to sort and things like that. So something that's kind of key to being able to show data on a grid, I guess. But that's kind of been extended in version 4. Okay, so cracking on. As I said, this is really a Whirlwind tool. So Entity Framework 4 is kind of up to maturity now. How many people use Entity Framework? Okay, cool. We've now got model-first development of your models. So you don't have to create the table before you create the model, which is kind of cool, but kind of core for any kind of ORM. POCO, so plain old CLR objects. You can create plain old CLR objects from Entity Framework 4. There's also full support for lazy loading and full support for foreign keys. Now, I'm not an Entity Framework user, so I'm not going to go into a demo of this. Workflow 4. How many people use Workflow? I did this straw poll, and I couldn't find anybody who used Workflow. Okay, cool. So we'd like you to start using Workflow with version 4. And basically, they tried to simplify everything down. So they've taken it down to a very kind of a single core activity-based unit. There's various improvements for the designer, the runtime designer, which is now fully built in WPF. You can also host and manage via Dublin. And there's an expanded activity library. And I'm just reading off the slide there where it says I could easily extend the workflow designer. As I said, it was built in WPF. I'm one of those people who wouldn't put my hand up either, so there you go. So WCF4. Now this is one thing I do use quite extensively. WCF is kind of a core communication layer within .NET. So they've kind of taken one of the core pain points with using WCF, at least for me, is the amount of configuration that's involved with setting up anything to do with WCF. Okay, you want to do a very simple service, you end up writing about 50 lines of XML on both sides of the wire just to describe the one service that you're trying to do. So they've tried to make that much, much simpler with WCF4. So the support for discovery, so WS discovery, which will allow you to actually discover what services are available on the server. There's no need for your .s3c anymore. You can actually activate things via configuration rather than having this kind of holder file that just says, hey, I'm a service, but you can go and find my code elsewhere. There's standard endpoints. So this is a core to kind of reducing the complexity of your configuration. If you're kind of just publishing MEX or publishing a very simple endpoint that everybody ends up publishing, you can use one of these standard endpoints and it reduces it to just one line of XML. And that leads into simplified configuration underneath. And also, there's improvements to the WCF REST library, such as caching and cross-domain JSON. And also, multiple IIS site bindings. Now, what that means is you can actually have one site in IIS with WCF, and you can actually bind it to more than one URL. Yes, that's what I said. Yay. Okay, so this is something that you couldn't do without a custom factory before. Now it's actually baked into the framework. You can actually say that this service actually listens on this internal URL and also this external URL, for example. So that's kind of nifty. Okay, ADO.NET Data Services, or as they are now renamed, WCF Data Services. Okay, so this is Astoria, if anybody's been right back through the story. So it started off as Astoria. It then became ADO.NET Data Services. It is now WCF Data Services. So if you are looking for help or any documentation on it, that's the code word. So on the server side, there's enhancements which allow you to do row count and also server-side paging, so it'll tell you where the next page is. You can also do friendly feeds and get blob data down pretty easy through the data services. And on the client side, there's obviously support for that server-side row count. And also bindings for those of you in WPF and Silverlight World. So let's have a quick squiz at what this means. So I have a ADO.NET data service, which is obviously not ADO.NET data services anymore. This is now WCF data services. And if I bring it up, this is my client side here. And luckily it comes with plenty of comments so that you can read with me. Okay, so I can now do a link query and ask my link query to include the total count, which I couldn't do before. And basically that just tells the WCF data services to do a slightly different URL, and all it does is include this variable saying include the inline count in all pages. And it will tell you the total amount, not just the amount that are in the current page. Pretty simple stuff. Then you can also just get the full count quite easily just by doing the $count at the end of your URL. So how many people know what Astoria is? Sorry, or ADO.NET Data Services or WCF Data Services? Okay, so just a brief, quick rundown. I have a model here, and then I have this service. And this service, all it does is feed out data. It feeds out an IEnumerable through WCF Data Services. And it allows me to write link queries against that service. So all I've done is said that I'm feeding out products. That's basically all I have to do to get that to work. And that's just running over my my entities called products. Okay? So now what I can do is I can run this up, run this one up. And it will just allow me to do link queries over the URL. So essentially, Astoria is link over HTTP. So that's the way to look at it. So if you've got a collection on your server and you want to publish it as a service, you don't necessarily want to publish all of your objects at exactly the same time. You want people to be able to query it quite easily. So it's a querying mechanism to allow you to actually say, hey, I want just this section or that section. But now we support paging and counting. So obviously I've now got the row count out. That wasn't there before. And if I actually look at the service itself, and I can do that inline count. So Astoria, WCF Data Services, ADO.NET Data Services, I don't care what you call it, it publishes Atom. So Atom is a standard XML format and allows you to kind of plug in common parsers into it. And if I look at the source for this, big text, so this is just Atom, and it's just saying which ones I've brought back, and it's got these properties on it. But if I kind of scroll to the bottom, and to the end, I can see that I've got this, or at least I should be able to see, there it is, that I've got this URL here, which allows me to skip to the next page within the collection. Sorry, that's not the URL I wanted to go to. That's why. There we go. And now let's get to the bottom. Yeah, that's the one I want. Sorry. Link. Relation is next, and it's just got a link to it. And all it does at the end is say skip to the next one. And it gives you the ID of the next one so that you can just pass that URL in. And I can literally go and copy that into Internet Explorer, and it will give me the next page of data. So it's limited to 20. Okay? That's a really quick rundown of WCF Data Services and what's new. Okay, parallel computing. So this is a big push within .NET 4. Obviously, chips aren't getting any faster anymore, kind of in a very vague, general glib statement. Chips aren't getting faster anymore, let's all go home. No, instead, we're kind of moving to this multi-core idea. So as developers, what we need to be able to do is take control of those chips and those cores and actually make our code run more efficiently. So the Parallel Computing Initiative is all about taking developers and saying, hey, your problem shouldn't be about concurrency. Your problem should be about meeting the business need, okay? You guys aren't paid to write concurrent programs. You're paid to meet what your client wants you to do. So it's concurrency for the masses is what Microsoft like to say, okay? So we're kind of saying you don't have to worry about thread or thread affinity or anything like that. We'll do all that hard work for you. Instead, we'll give you really easy ways to do parallel computing. So in .NET 4, you've got the task parallel library. You've also got plink, and that's probably the most likely way that you're going to get into parallel computing in an easy way. There's also various coordination data structures, which allows plink and the task parallel library to actually work underneath everything. And there's been various improvements to the kind of core base system threading library. So parallel link, let's just go quickly into what parallel link is and how to get the most out of it. For those of you who were in Ivan's talk last night, you should be remembering one thing today. But parallel link enables a quick translation of existing link queries and allow them to run parallelized in parallel. So if I've got this current link query, which is just pulling out certain people from a collection and then ordering them, I can make this parallel by adding what to those people who were at Ivan's talk last night? Yeah, cool. Ivan will be really pleased that everybody remembered that. Okay, cool. Dot as parallel. Nice and easy. Okay, so for those of you who weren't at Ivan's talk yesterday, here's a quick demo of plink. So those of you who would have seen a baby names demonstration, which, of course, I used to choose the name of my baby. No, not really. It's just a very simple application that has a lot of data and then asks to do a query over that data. And in this case, it's kind of popularity of baby names across US states. But that's the kind of idea is that if you've got a lot of data that you're querying over, you don't really want to do those sequentially because you won't end up using your machine to the best of its ability. So let's load in, say, 100 megabytes of data. So that's saying how many names are in my core data set. It's going to load it into memory. And then I'm just going to do a plain old link query over that. And it's going to go away and say, how many times does Robert appear in this state? And it's going to say, hey, it was really popular towards 2000. But that ran in seven seconds. And if I bring up my trusty Windows Task Manager and ask it kind of what's my usage, 0%, must be on Windows 7. Okay, cool. And you can see it kind of cuts out at about the 50% mark. I just realized that's slightly off screen, but yeah. But it never gets beyond using one of my cores. Because I'm on a multi-core machine, I'm on a core 2, so you can actually immediately see that I need to be able to use both cores to actually use my computer efficiently. Okay? So if I run the P-Link version of this, so just watch this bar up here, I run P-Link, and it shoots up right to the top. And it does it in 1.7 times faster, essentially. You'll never get 2 times faster. There's various overhead with doing parallel computing. There's a lot of merging and things that have to happen, and coordination between the multiple threads. But generally speaking, you will get quite a speed up just by doing one thing. And that one thing is to add as parallel. And I double-clicked instead of going code behind. Okay, so what's the difference between those queries? As you can imagine, as I keep on saying the one thing, I've got a sequential query and a parallel query. They're exactly the same piece of link. So where something happens, an order buys something. But the from is slightly different. And the from just says, instead of just grabbing names, grab names as a parallel collection instead of just the normal enumerable. And the degree of parallelism just says how many cores do I want to use. And by default, it uses both of them. So that's as hard as it is to switch a current link query over to a parallel link query. And it should be something that you should all be looking at doing with a kind of a degree of I want to monitor how fast it is before I kind of settle on it. Okay, so that's parallel link. So DLR, dynamic language runtime, and why? Okay, so a lot of you probably aren't dynamic language developers. You probably don't generally go away and write Ruby for your development. Some of you will. Good on you. I'm not knocking either of it. But dynamic language runtime is more than just about allowing things like Iron Python and Iron Ruby to run. There's actually a lot more to it. This is where the Dynamic Language Runtime Initiative came from essentially. They started trying to get Python, trying to get Ruby to run on the CLR, and found that there were various things that weren't quite adapted to running on the CLR very well. So they created the DLR, the Dynamic Language Runtime, which sits between dynamic languages and the CLR, but also allows static languages such as C# and VB to also talk to the DLR. So they can do some nifty things that they wouldn't have been able to do without the dynamic language runtime. So dynamic language runtime is made up of 3 parts. It's all about allowing expression trees to be compiled. Dynamic dispatch, so allowing you to dispatch messages that you don't necessarily know are going to be there at compile time. And also caching so that it's not quite so slow as it would be otherwise. On top of the dynamic language runtime, we can obviously run all these languages. We can run Iron Python and Iron Ruby, and also your current language set, such as F# or C# or VB.NET. But the most important thing is we can create binders out of that DLR. So we can obviously bind to things like Python and to Ruby, but we can also bind to our common kind of .NET language core. We can also bind to Office or to Silverlight. So by creating those binders, we actually increase the kind of scope of the DLR to more than just the dynamic languages themselves. So I'm just going to show you a quick demo of the DLR in action. And all I've done here is taken down an Iron Python install and grabbed a couple of DLLs out of it. But apart from that, everything else is in the box. And all I'm going to do, I'm not going to show off anything that's particularly powerful in Python or anything like that. I'm just going to show that you can pull in Python quite quickly. So I've got a program here, and I'm just creating a Python runtime. So I'm not kind of creating a command line and saying, bring up the Python interpreter and I'll pump some text into the Python interpreter. I'm actually telling the .NET DLR to kind of run up an instance of Python and load in a file. And that's just a file that I've copied into my bin file here in amongst all these Python files. There's one called random, which is quite random, and it just loads it in and then asks it to do a set of operations over a set of items. And you'll also notice this new keyword called dynamic. This is new in .NET 4, essentially saying, I don't really know what this object's going to be, and I don't want you to throw up any compile time warnings. I kind of know what I'm doing. And if I type in random, you can see IntelliSense has kind of told me that I don't really know what I can do with this. It's a dynamic expression, so this operation will be resolved at runtime. It's kind of self-explanatory. You can type anything after this, and it will fail if it doesn't exist, but it will kind of run if it does. So the key there is you need to kind of adopt tools like test-driven development or something to actually, or unit tests to actually allow you to see that you're using those dynamic keywords right. But in this term, I'm actually using it to create some output from that program. So this is a class that's come back from Python essentially that I know has a shuffle method, but .NET doesn't need to know about it straight away. And if I just run that up, it's just going to say, oh, wrong demo. Helps if I kind of do the right one, doesn't it? Let's do this one. That's much better. Okay, so it's just going to load in random.py. It's kind of as you expect. It says, yay, it loaded, and then I shuffled some random stuff together. Okay, nothing whiz-bang or whirlwind. So that's just quickly the DLR, but I'm going to show you some of the power of those, kind of the DLR and what it gives you in a second. So the other thing that's come with the DLR is this idea of type equivalence. So basically saying that two classes, even though they're not actually in the same DLL or in the same assembly, can be marked as type equivalent as long as they match the same interfaces or have the same properties on them. So the power of this comes when we start talking about primary interrupts. So how many people have done COM programming from .NET? Okay, cool. How many people have done Office automation from .NET? How many people have found that fun? Okay, that was kind of the reaction I was expecting. Okay, there's one major pain point in that if you want to use Excel or you want to use Word and you want to use just one method out of that primary interrupt, you have to drag the whole interrupt with you, or maybe 2 or 3 interrupts because that relies on another interrupt which happens to rely on another one. So they all have to be in the bin directory, and suddenly your kind of 50 kilobyte program has blown out to a massive 10 megabytes just because of this primary Office interrupt. I'm obviously kind of scaling things down a little bit there. So PIA obviously doesn't just stand for primary interrupt assembly, and there's very good reasons for that. So how about we use type equivalence and we use the dynamic language runtime to say, go away PIA. We don't really want them anymore. Okay, we need to kind of say that we don't care about all the McGoverns that we have to carry around. We only care about the one thing we're calling. So .NET is now able to take your interop assemblies and say, you only called this COM method. I'm going to compile that in with my DLL, and I'm just going to mark it as type equivalent to the PIA that I would otherwise be carrying around with me. Okay? And I'll show you how that works. So the demo that just came up is actually the demo that I want to run now. It just kind of jumped in front of me. So I have an Office automation program here. Yay for Office automation. I'm just going to undo some stuff that I did before. Okay, cool. So as you can see, I've got the Excel and the Word interop here, and I'm using them to do something that everybody wants to do, which is to create a chart in Excel and then paste it into a Word document. Because that's just business sense, that is. So let's run that and see what that looks like. So you can see I just created a chart and then kind of copied it and then opened up Word and pasted it in. And pasted it, there we go, cool. Okay, So that's just done in .NET, so C# kind of marshalling those COM interrupts. So I don't want to save those because I'm going to do them again. And I've got it in code, so it doesn't matter. OK, so my program here. You can see the generate chart here is quite simple. It's a lot easier. And suddenly, I can't see the Office interrupt that I used to be able to, sorry, the Office kind of methods that I used to be able to work with. Let's show you an example down here. So this, if you worked in VB, you'd be quite used to this. But if you've worked in C#, this is kind of used to be a pain in the ass. Chart Wizard took in a hell of a lot of parameters, okay? And you used to have to kind of put in missing for each single one until the one that you actually wanted to specify. So now you can actually use optional parameters and named parameters. So I can say that just fill in the source parameter with this and the title parameter with this. And I don't have to fill in all the other 256 parameters just to get those two through to the interrupt. So that's one thing that's come in the latest version. I can also use the DLR, as I said, and this type equivalence to get some more power out of this. So if I compile that and just show you the bin directory that got created. So obviously I had to copy in these interrupts because, hey, you're going to use Excel or you're going to use Word, so I need to carry this around with me all the time. So instead, what I want to do is tell .NET that it should embed the interrupt types, okay? So it should take the methods that I'm using and embed them in my DLL. It's quite a simple concept. It's not that hard to get your head around. All I do is switch a Boolean, and I can compile. Awesome. And I can run, and it does exactly the same thing. It's exactly as fidel? No, it has as much fidelity as it had before. There we go, that's better. But you can see now that I don't have these interrupts in my bin folder anymore. I don't have to carry them around anymore. They've actually been embedded in the DLL, but only the parts that I wanted to use. And then .NET marked them as type equivalent to the interrupt and said, hey, these do exactly the same things, so don't worry if the interrupt's not around. Okay, and that's type equivalence. So, just a few pointers at the end. So the .NET Framework 4 is made to be really highly compatible with .NET 3.5, 3, and 2. So when .NET 2 came out, it kind of wasn't able to load up .NET 1.1 DLLs with 2. You had to kind of run one or the other. You couldn't be running them both at the same time. But just a couple of notes for you. .NET 4 won't automatically roll forward. So if you've downloaded .NET 4 and you've got it on your machine, and you've compiled a DLL in 3.5, that DLL will still run against the 2.0 CLR. It won't automatically run against the 4 CLR. You actually have to put some configuration in there to say that, hey, this is all right to actually run against the 4 CLR. So obviously that's just because it's best practice not to mess around with your code that you know what's going on. Microsoft didn't want to say, hey, hold on, we know better than you. We are just going to randomly run this on the 4 CLR. Instead, it asks you to make that decision. However, if you compile something in .NET 4, it will automatically run in .NET 4. It won't randomly run in 3.5 or something. And then we've got this concept of side-by-side loading. Okay, so this is the previous idea of when kind of the CLR2 came out. If you had a plugin that was written in 2 and you loaded it into, say, a process, say, Outlook, then Outlook would pull in the CLR2 and run the CLR2 and run your plugin on that CLR. And then say you had an older plugin that you wanted to also load, and it was in .NET 1 or 1.1, so it obviously ran on a different CLR. It would say no. Okay, it would tell you that it can't do that. It can't run 2 versions of the CLR at the same time, and it can't run 1.1 code on the 2 CLR. However, Microsoft have fixed this. So you might now go away and write a 4.0 add-in for a program. So this doesn't have to be Outlook. This could be like a shell extension or an unmanaged extension. And you have existing plugins that are written in 3.5 on the .NET 2 CLR. It will actually say yes. Okay, I can do that. And a quick demo for you, which I wasn't sure I could get to it, but I'm pretty sure I can. Okay, so I have a project here that has two libraries. Okay, one of them is written in .NET 3.5, or set to compile in .NET 3.5. One of them is set to compile in .NET 4. Okay, and they're really, really complex programs. I won't go into depth. Basically, they kind of do some really, really deep business logic. Secret to zero. All they do is say hello from whatever environment they're running in. And then the key is that I've got this unmanaged assembly here that says kind of load in these DLLs and run them and allow them to run. So there's this nice little command in .NET that allows you to kind of see what version of the CLR has been loaded in by anything at one time. So you can see everything's running on .NET 4, on the CLR version 4. Can everybody read that? Yeah. And if I now go in and load that unmanaged host, you can see I've said hello from .NET from the CLR version 2, and I've said hello from the .NET 4 CLR, and I can run the same CLR version, and you can notice down the bottom here, my unmanaged host, sorry, I'll scroll it up so that everybody can try and see. My unmanaged host is actually loaded in both versions of the CLR. So they're running side by side in the same process. Okay, so that's a neat little feature that will allow a lot more compatibility in terms of backwards. In terms of backwards, that really didn't work very well. Okay, cool. So that's kind of all I wanted to run through with .NET 4. There aren't that many kind of headline major, yay, come and do this. There are a few things, if you're a developer, go away and learn about Parallel Link or the Parallel Task Library and see where that can kind of come out and use. All the demos were taken from the Visual Studio 2010 training kit, so you can go away and download that, and you can actually go and play with all this stuff and all this training stuff. There's obviously lots of things within individual parts of the .NET 4 framework which you might have a very special interest in. I tried to kind of keep this broad and kind of wide rather than kind of going into anything too in-depth. But if you want to go and learn some more, I would suggest these talks that are probably all gone now, but you can always download them on TechEd Online and have a listen and have a look. So thank you very much from me. Thank you for being an attentive audience.